As we continue our study of Genesis with Genesis 42 to 44, we look at the story of the coming of the brothers to Joseph. And I'd like to look at a concept tonight that is at work in this story, as well as in the entire Old Testament to a great extent. As we study this particular section, we recognize the understanding of what sin was all about. I'd like to just briefly recapitulate the story a little bit. Of course, we know that Joseph has now risen in power in Egypt, and we've talked about that already. But as he now has taken on this important position, he still must be in some sort of a supervisory role where he is able to see exactly who is coming and going from the various parts of the region, and particularly from Canaan. And one would almost expect maybe he's on the lookout for his brothers, wondering if and when they are going to come. And many people are rather irritated about what Joseph would do at this point, that he would almost make his brothers crawl instead of simply saying to them, okay, all is forgiven, God meant it to good. But part of what Joseph is doing here is to look at the whole aspect of sin and the consequences that come back around to it. The easiest way maybe to talk about this is to ask about or to pose the question about what might be called a boomerang theory of justice. Joseph's brothers go down to Egypt. They come before him. They are quizzed very intensively, and Simeon is left in the land. At first, Joseph was only going to allow one brother to go back, and then he allows all but one to go back. So we're seeing Reuben and Simeon and Judah all play an important role here, the children of Leah. And Levi is the only one of those four who doesn't play a role. And when they go back, then after they have explained that their youngest brother was still at home and the other one was no more, which is as far as they get with that, then they have to go back again to get some more grain, and Jacob, or Israel, finally says, if I'm to lose my youngest son Benjamin, I'll do so. The money had been put back in the sacks after they came back the first time, so they bring back a double portion of money. And they are told, no, everything was okay, we got your money, we don't know what the problem is. And then once again, the money is put back in, and the cup is put back in, the divining cup. So we find that that Joseph is practicing some of the Egyptian activities here, as he is supposedly divining the future by drinking from a cup and hoping that the God will give him insight. And so there are some little aspects of what's going on here that are Egyptian and worship of other gods in nature. But then the cup is put in Benjamin's sack, and he is the one who is to be taken captive. When they were still back in Canaan, Reuben had offered to be the one who would go surety for his youngest brother Benjamin, and his own boys could in essence be killed. That apparently was not accepted, but Judah then goes forth and says, Father, if anything happens, then you can blame me for all of the problems. And then Judah, who had, remember, not too long ago had impregnated his daughter-in-law and had children by her, now he is the one who stands forward at the end of the story to offer himself before the Pharaoh's governor. I might just make mention here that when we look at the story of Joseph, or the story of Judah, it's rather odd that even though he had that son Shelah, that it is through Perez and Zerah, and Perez here in this case, that Jesus' lineage is followed. So he doesn't get born of the oldest son of Judah either. Very typical kind of thing that younger sons are known if they rise in importance over the oldest son of the family who would normally take over. Well, what's this whole thing about a boomerang theory of justice? The idea that many people still believe is the essence of religion today is what you sow, you reap. When you throw a boomerang, it comes back to to the person who has thrown that to where it has come from. And when we look at the stories in the Bible, particularly all the way through the Old Testament and on into the way that our Lord's suffering and death and resurrection is described, we find this as the common theme. We might think in our day and age, if we got away with something, let's say that we didn't declare some income on our income taxes and there was no way to follow that, and people who work for cash, then they are able to say, well, I don't have to declare this money because there's no way that anybody can trace it to me. Um, People would say today, if we can get away with it, then we've done a good job for ourselves and we've saved a little bit of money. Some suggest that almost 20% of income in our country is not paid, or taxes are not paid on it because there is no trail. Well, it's a little bit different if you think that God himself, or some God for people of any other country, would be watching over and seeing what's taking place and sooner or later cause that trouble to come back upon a person. When the brothers are standing there, what Joseph really seems to be wanting them to do is to own up to their own sin in the process. And so they say, now because of what we've done to our brother, now this is coming back. So they've seemingly gotten away with it, but they recognize that sooner or later the worm turns, or the what you sow you reap, and now they feel like they're getting in trouble for what they had done. I would almost wonder whether when Jacob heard the story, whether he might have had even a flash of a thought after the dreams that Joseph had had, that maybe this man down in Egypt would be his son. But we're of course told nothing about that, and the brothers certainly have no indication of that either. But when they then are asked to go back and bring their brother, and they're asked about the condition of their father, then when they come back the second time and it is indeed Benjamin, and then Judah goes forward and says, may I please stand in his stead, there are people who would at least see a hint, nothing that one would guess directly at that point, but a hint of what comes later when a descendant of Judah, our Lord, in fact does stand instead of everyone else and take the punishment for the crime. And the point of it is, in most of the Old Testament, it is assumed that what you sow, you reap. When we think about a covenant where God says, I'm going to bless you and I'll watch over all of you, the idea was God said, I'm going to set forth good things in motion for you, and they will keep on coming back to you, and then you can keep on offering your blessings to me and your thanks to me. It's not really described in a lot of detail in this Joseph story, but that's the notion. Now, on the other hand, if I have gone away from that relationship, if I have broken that marriage or covenant relationship and gone after other gods, even though the commandments aren't given yet, if I have gone for another way of life than the one that I've been living under or being supported by, then sooner or later the troubles are going to come to me. It's that notion which everyone who is thinking sooner or later it's going to catch up with me is really thinking about. And religion itself is predicated on that. Many times people will say, well, God was nice to the people and loved them and cared for them like Abraham, and then he gave them rules or guidelines or ordinances that they were to follow if they were going to stay in the relationship. And that really kind of distorts the whole story. It's not that they had to follow those to stay in the relationship, they were already in it. But if they didn't follow those and went off in some other direction, then it would be seen that they were breaking the relationship. So God's promises are ongoing, not just on the basis of what people do. Their actions are to be a consequence of his blessings, not in order to get them, but a consequence of them. If they indeed stay in that relationship, then the blessings are going to come back to them. Now the brothers say, we figured out now we've got to face it, that we went off a different direction. We've gone away from what our Father and what the relationship with our God would be, though they don't really say that too directly. We've gone off in this other direction, and now these problems are coming back to haunt us because we are getting again what we sowed. Now we're in trouble as we got our brother in trouble. If one would look in terms of the many promises in the Bible, it's very easy thinking of a religious organization where we're told you do this and then you get the blessing, to concentrate so much on the actions that one says the actions cause the consequences. And the trouble is, when we look at the covenant with Abraham, the actions don't cause the consequences. The consequences of God's love are to cause the actions to be consistent with it. So Abraham is told, I'll bless you, and then Abram goes. And Jacob is told, God says, go back to your country and your father's house, and I'll protect you from your father-in-law and your brother, and he goes. So it's the promises that are already assured or guaranteed which lead to the action if one understands what faith is. So faith in this sense is the very opposite of religion. Faith says, I don't see anything now, but I've been assured that this is going to happen. I'll act on what I'm told is going to take place, and I'll be consistent with that, even though I don't see it, and I'll wait, and God says He will let the blessings come. If I say I'm going to do something because I'll get the blessings, then if I act and I don't see all the blessings there yet, I might quit doing the acting. I might quit being someone who is willing to stay in that relationship. The Israelites, in their whole system and everything that we find in the book of the Torah, the books of the Torah, they really were told, God is your God. He's bringing you out of Egypt, as the next book, of course, will tell, and He's bringing you into a land of promise. Therefore, in response, in thank you, in coordination with what God's already doing, don't be going against Him, but stay in that relationship, and then all the blessings that He promises will come. So it's not that what I do gets the blessing, but if I act contrary to the blessing, I can hinder it, and at a certain point finally even lose the blessings. Between the time that I start fighting against that and the time that the punishment comes, that's simply and purely God's grace not having that boomerang be a very quick kind of thing for me. The result of the brothers' reaction now is that comes because they have said, finally, all of this is catching up with us. We thought we escaped it. We thought we pulled this off to get rid of that dreamer who was boasting about himself, but now we see those problems coming back on us. So the dilemma in much of the scriptures is, God, why are you hurting me so quickly for some little thing I did? And God, why are you not punishing those others who are doing the terrible things against me? Which is the classic form of a lament, in many of the Psalms of lament. Why have you forsaken me? Why are you so far from helping me? From the words of my groaning, I've been faithful, but you have been faithless to me, God. So in that interim where God, because He loves sinners, might not be letting their wickedness come on them right away, just like it didn't happen for the brothers right away, there one would say the world is unfair. And Joseph obviously has considered that he's been treated unfairly. He even told the two men who were in prison with him, I was stolen and unjustly sold into slavery here in Egypt. Would you please get me out of this terrible dungeon that I'm in? Well, at this point, we can't quite know for sure. Is Joseph really trying to just get the brothers to finally acknowledge that they indeed have sinned? Well, he hears that. And is he ready to see whether they will do anything to amend their life, to go back to being faithful part of the family? And both Reuben and Judah then come in for special mention at this point. Or will they simply try to continue to look for some other way out of the problems and say, well, too bad, we've got to leave our brother here in Egypt, and we did our best. So he's really probing to see what's in their heart. That's what a wise person will do. Will try and look for those things which help to bring out the reality of the circumstances. And what we will see now in the very next story is how the brothers acknowledge then that they have sinned, that there's no way out of it for them for what they have done. They've been brought back, and Benjamin has this cup in the mouth of the sack, and they have nothing, no kind of mercy they can plead for. They've been caught red-handed, even though they don't know what they did wrong. And so they're brought before Joseph, and of course it's going to go on now with him delivering them. In essence, which is what forgiveness is. It says that other person has sinned, and I have a justifiable reason, if I have the power to do so, to bring the consequences of that sin upon them. But if I choose not to do that, then I'm acting in mercy. But then, if that other person doesn't get hurt, then I get hurt. And the large picture of what we find in the scriptures is Jesus, when he comes and suffers and dies on the cross, takes the hurt, takes what should have come to the brothers and should have come to everyone else. So there is always, according to this rather general model that follows all the way through the Old Testament, someone has to pay. We don't usually talk in terms of Jesus only in terms of that he had to pay somebody. Who would he be paying? Would he be paying his father? Would he be paying the devil? Um, that is one idea that people have used, that there's a transaction that goes on. But I think it's easier to understand it that he takes the consequences that would have come before they come back to all the human beings. He steps in the way and suffers and dies. Judah, his ancestor, is giving a kind of an example of that here with the story, and of course then, as we're going to see right away in the next chapter, then Joseph finally reveals himself to his brothers. But if we can think of the fact that this concept that goes all the way through the scriptures is one that does say there's always someone who will have to pay for whatever's done wrong, that can, whatever has been done wrong, that can help us understand Jesus' action a little bit. But there is also another story, the story of those like Job, who do nothing apparently wrong, and the troubles come upon them. And that other voice that comes in the scriptures says, don't always think that you can figure out exactly why something has happened to someone. Don't see if you can play God and try and connect all the pieces to show why someone should be learning from what they have done, that God's finally spanking them. That would deny, if God is a punisher today, that would deny that Jesus' death and resurrection is the full and complete solution to the problem of our sin. And the scriptures say it is finished. That's all done. At most, what we might see is there might be times when God lets something happen or even causes something to happen, we don't know how to figure that out, that would keep us from running farther away. That when we might think to do something as wicked as Joseph's brothers did, that something would keep us from going farther. But to try to read the heart of God or read the mind of God and explain things, the scriptures generally tell us to be very cautious about that, and not to try to play the game of telling people why something bad has happened to them. We might be wrong, as Job's friends were. Instead, we're called to deal in mercy as much as we can, and to remember that that idea of the boomerang theory of justice is indeed there, but that the full extent of that for all time has taken place when Jesus suffered and died on the cross in our stead, taking the consequences of all of our rebellion, and then coming forth from the grave that we might live. The point of it is we are then to be as honest as we can be about what really is in our heart, as Joseph's brothers are at this point when they recognize that finally they don't get away with anything, but then to plead for God in his mercy, not only to forgive, but to deliver us from the power of those kinds of ideas and thoughts and words and deeds, so that we are not trying to go that different direction any longer. So growth in our Christian life is being more and more honest about the rebelliousness that once held us and no longer does, and yet the desires that we have to go away from God, and yet on the other hand to come even more quickly to God and say, please help me, and spoil and destroy in me the desires to do those things that are against your will, as I try to seek to respond and thank you with my life. That also means, as we read the scriptures, that we are to listen very carefully to what we are encouraged to do as Christians. The loving, the forgiving, the caring for others, the seeing other people as human beings, and to look very carefully at the way our Lord lived his life, so that we can detect what power he has put inside of us. We're not trying to be model or trying to look for models. We're recognizing how we're being carried along, as Joseph's brothers were, and asking God to keep us from going and swerving off in the other directions. So I hope this will give a little bit of an insight. It's a very clear section to show what we in our time would call conscience, but conscience in the light of a covenant relationship with God, which acts against God when it forgets the blessings that one already has. God's continued blessings on you as we draw to a conclusion of our study of the book of Genesis. Thank you very much.